Our text today is Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 43. And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live." And he went with him. And a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. And there was a woman who'd had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, but was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus, and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, "If I touch even his garments, I will be made well." And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" But his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. They came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue. And Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he had entered, he said to them, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him, and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hands, he said to her, "Talitha cumi," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age. And they were immediately overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and he told them to give her something to eat. Sometimes Christianity is misunderstood for something it's not. Many people may think of Christianity primarily as a set of doctrines or a moral code or a value system. Now, all those things matter because what we believe shapes how we live. But at its core, Christianity is more than all those things. Christianity is founded upon faith. And as we have been reminded throughout this series on faith, that faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. This is how the people of God have always lived, by faith. Noah built the ark before the rain came. Abraham left home on God's promise, and Peter stepped out on the water at Jesus' word. Mark 5 brings us right back to that same foundation of faith, especially in moments when life feels desperate and all our hope seems gone. In this passage, we're going to see what faith looks like in those moments. It looks to Jesus with hope. It moves towards him despite the risk, and it holds on while we wait. So let's start with the first one. Faith looks to Jesus with hope. The story introduces us to two people in situations that seem beyond help. One is Jairus. He is a synagogue ruler whose daughter is dying. And imagine the scene, a child laying at home in bed, barely breathing, parents standing at bedside, helpless to do anything. This is every parent's worst nightmare. And as we know, in those days, there was no hospitals, there was no medicine, there was no treatment. When someone reached this point, death was often but minutes away. The other person in the story is a woman who has suffered with a bleeding disorder of some kind for 12 years. We learn that for 12 years, she had spent everything she had on doctors and treatments, but she received no answers. In fact, her condition has only gotten worse. The bleeding has increased. Now, because of her condition, this woman would have also been ritually unclean, which meant that for the last 12 years, she would have had to live isolated from others as a social and spiritual outcast. So both Jairus and the woman are facing the same terrible conclusion, that nothing could be done for them. Nothing could be done. And this is one of the worst feelings in the world when you realize that there are no solutions available. Over the number of years I've had in ministry, I have sat, whether it's in hospital waiting rooms or family rooms, where people have reached that moment. And the doctors have said everything they can say. The treatments are finished, and there are no more options. And it is a terrible place to be. And many of us have been in moments like that, moments where the situation feels completely beyond our control, and moments where it feels like there is absolutely nothing left to do. That is the place where this story begins for Jairus and the woman. But then something changes. A ray of light pierces through the darkness. Jesus has returned to town. Now, word has quickly spread around that he has just arrived back across the lake. Jesus is not a stranger to these people. His reputation has already spread throughout all of Galilee, where Jesus has already healed many people. They had seen his power. They had heard about what he has done. And so as we enter this, we're going to see this is not a story so much of blind faith. It's a story about what these people have already seen and heard about Jesus. And they've seen and they've heard enough that they are hopeful enough to come to Jesus, even though they cannot see or understand how it will turn out. And so both of them come to him in faith. Jairus comes very openly and directly. He falls at Jesus' feet and he says, "Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." The woman approaches Jesus differently. She slips through the crowd quietly, thinking, if I just touch even his garments, I will be made well. Despite their different approaches, both of them are doing the same thing. They are placing their hope in Jesus. They are putting their faith in Jesus. Now, hopefully we've understood this by this point, but it's worth just taking a step back and looking and recognizing that unlike what many people in the world might believe, faith is not just a belief that things will work out. Faith is not just positive thinking or sending out good thoughts or believing in the universe or, sending good vibes or trusting in karma. Now, faith has an object, and in this story and in the Christian world, that object is Jesus Christ. Faith has an object, and that object is Jesus Christ. When we think about faith in Jesus, it's like a little child. It's a little bit like a child waiting to be picked up from school. The child isn't standing there out on the sidewalk hoping that someone from the universe will show up. He's not sending good thoughts into the air and hoping a ride appears. No, he's waiting for a specific person. He knows who is coming. He knows they love him. He knows they've done it before. And that's why he waits out there in front of the school on the sidewalk with confidence. And in the same way, Christian faith is not vague optimism. It is confidence in who is coming. It is confidence in who is coming into our life to do something. Now, faith like that, faith that looks to Jesus like that in hope, it does not stay still. When you truly trust in Jesus and who he is, you don't remain where you are. You move toward him, just like the folks in our story. You move toward him, and that movement will often cost you something. So faith looks to Jesus in hope. And two, we see that faith moves towards Jesus despite the risk. Faith is not safe. And both of these people, Jairus and the woman, they take enormous risks coming to Jesus. Now, for Jairus, the risk is social and professional. He is the synagogue ruler. He belonged to the religious establishment of the community. And many within that group were already very suspicious of Jesus. And yet, here he comes, falling at Jesus' feet in public, and he begs him. He begs him to come to his house. And again, at this point, Jesus is this controversial rabbi, and he's humbling himself before him, and he's risking his reputation, he's risking his standing, he's risking his dignity. Later in the story, when Jesus does arrive at his home, the mourners laugh at him. Now, the woman, her risk may be even greater. According to the law, as I said, her condition made her unclean, which means she's not supposed to touch anyone, and yet there she is, elbowing and muscling her way through the crowd. If the people had realized her condition and what she was doing, they would have been, very angry with her. There could have been just a mob scene, but she comes anyway, and she is willing to risk humiliation, exposure, and rejection. And then probably the worst thing that she could have imagined happens. Jesus calls her out, and she ends up having to tell her entire story in front of everybody. Her shameful, humiliating story in front of everybody. And this is what faith does. It will often put us in positions where we feel vulnerable. Faith does not come with bubble wrap and a guarantee of comfort. Through Scripture, we see the same pattern. Faith is always going to put you out there on the edge, like when Esther risked her life by approaching the king uninvited, or Daniel continues to pray even though it could mean going into the lion's den. Faith is risky, and it puts us in vulnerable positions. But this is where we see something so important, and it's that faith that never moves, that never steps forward, that never risks anything, isn't really faith at all. Faith is only faith when you're out on the ledge, when you're out there doing the hard thing. So it's worth asking ourselves as we're reading the story about people who were willing to take that risk. When was the last time you trusted the Lord with something big? When was the last time you were willing to look foolish because you trusted in Jesus, right? Now for some of us, faith may look like trusting the Lord with a situation we cannot control, whether it's a diagnosis or a strained relationship or a difficult decision about the future. It's just a big thing, and it's very uncertain, but we're willing to kind of go out there and put ourselves in that risky spot because we know who Jesus is. Now, for others, it may mean stepping forward in obedience, even when we're unsure of what people are going to think, and they're going to, look at us sideways because of what we're willing to risk for Jesus. Whatever the situation may be, and perhaps something has sprung to your mind, faith requires trust that leads to action. And that's such an important key here that faith requires trust that leads to action. But faith does more than just move towards Jesus. As we see here in our own experience, eventually it has to wait. And waiting in faith is often the hardest part. So let's look at our last section of the story. That faith holds on while it waits. Faith holds on while it waits. And this is where our confidence is really tested. This is where our confidence is really tested. So let's get back into the story. Jesus speaks to the woman, and he tells her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well." It's just a beautiful, beautiful interaction between them. And it wasn't Jesus's clothing that healed her. We know that. Her faith brought her to Jesus. And when she came to him, his power met her need. It was just her faith brought her to that place where she could receive what Jesus had for her. And something remarkable happens, right? She feels healing immediately. And all that the world could not fix, Jesus did in an instant, in a moment. And the first words Jesus speaks to her is, "Daughter." And we see that this was more than about healing. After 12 years of living as an outcast, this is about restoration. This is about giving her life back in ways that she couldn't even have imagined. Now, at the very same time, Jairus is waiting for Jesus to come to his daughter. And every moment matters. Because while Jesus is standing still, his daughter is slipping away. And all of this is happening in the middle of a crowd that's pressing in on Jesus from every side. So every step is slow, every moment is delayed. And from Jairus' perspective, it must have felt like his need, his urgent need, his desperate need was being passed over or ignored or forgotten about. And I think many of us know what that feels like, that feeling that Jesus is moving slower than we want, or perhaps not at all. So what do you do when Jesus feels slow? Because I think, as I mentioned, I think this is where our faith is probably tested the most. Not even when we come to Jesus first, but when we're waiting for him to act. In those moments when nothing seems to be changing, when the situation is only getting worse and it feels like time is running out. Because faith is more than confidence in who is coming. It's confidence in him even when he is slow. Even when he is slow. The messengers arrive with the words no parent ever wants to hear. Your daughter is dead. In that moment, Jairus stands between two very different realities. On the one hand, he's just heard his daughter is dead. On the other hand, he has just witnessed the power of Jesus. Which will he believe? Will he believe the word he has just heard or the hope of the miracle he has just seen? And before Jairus can even respond, Jesus speaks. Do not fear, only believe. Do not fear, only believe. You see, Jesus is not asking Jairus to ignore reality. He's calling on him to remember where his hope lies, where his hope has always been. And his hope is not in the timing, and not in a necessary outcome. His hope is in him. It's in Jesus, because faith is confidence in who is coming. So Jairus continues walking with Jesus, maybe trembling, maybe confused, but he keeps walking with Jesus. And when they reach the house, Jesus sends everyone out except the parents and a few disciples. And Jairus and his wife, they open the door to their daughter's room. And that simple act of trust is all that is needed. Jesus takes the girl by the hand and he says, little girl, I say to you, arise. And immediately she stands up and she begins walking. Mark adds then a wonderful detail that ties these stories together. The woman who had suffered for 12 years, and this little girl was 12 years old. And in a single moment, Jesus restores both of these daughters. These twin stories show us that Jesus has authority even over what seems final. And they press one truth on us that faith must hold on to. That Jesus is not limited by what seems impossible to us. Not sickness, not suffering, not even death. And not even by what we think is too late. Jesus isn't limited by any of it. The same hands that healed the suffering woman are the same hands that lifted a little girl from death. And those same hands would one day be stretched out on the cross. And not to display his power, but to bear our sin and to make a way for you and I to be fully restored and healed and made whole again. And 3 days later, after the cross, the one who raised Jairus' daughter would rise from the grave himself, and showing that death does not have the final word. And that has extraordinary implications. It means the hope that we see in the story, it's not just hope about what Jesus can do for us in this life when we face difficult and desperate situations. It's about the promise that all who trust in him will be raised to life, and Jesus will overcome all for our good. So what do we do with this? Some of us are in hard situations, and I know that because I know the life of our church family. I will say this. Jesus is not asking us to ignore reality, but he's calling us to remember where our hope has always been, in him. And so we trust Jesus in every circumstance. When the situation feels beyond help, when nothing seems to be changing, even when everything in front of us seems to say that it is over, we trust in him. Because that's what faith is. Confidence in he who is coming, in the one who is coming, and the one who raises the dead is never late. Hang on to those words of hope and encouragement that the one who raises the dead, he is never, ever late.